So the first round of official leaks is out from Two Blue Vortex's Chapter 16. That is to say that the team behind Two Blue Vortex has leaked one page and one page alone of the upcoming Chapter 16. And in this one leaked page, we see that Konohamaru and maybe some others have arrived in the village hidden in the sand. And now this isn't anything unexpected. We've been building our way towards the hidden sand being more involved in Two Blue Vortex's story for a little while now. Konohamaru pulling up to the hidden sand village could be a sign of some auspicious times on the horizon for not only Konohamaru, but also maybe Gaara. That is to say, while the reinforcements arriving in the Hidden Sand Village may seem like a good thing for the good guys, Konohamaru showing up in the Hidden Sand Village after Gaara was sealed by Shinki, and now that Shinki is a Shinju in the form of Ryu looking for Gaara, could actually possibly spell the end times for a character introduced in the second episode of Naruto. That is to say that I think Konohamaru pulling up in the Hidden Sand Village might lead to his death.
Nick, what are you talking about? You're telling me that the shinobi leader of the New Age Team 7 is gonna die?
I'm not saying it's not a possibility. But that being said, Chapter 16 may not just be the end times for Konohamaru, it could also possibly be lights out for Gaara. Yeah, I know what you're saying, Nick, there's no way they're gonna kill two fan-favorite characters, but I think it's a legitimate possibility, especially if we consider how Shippuden started. And thus today we're getting dark and dreary with it because today we're talking Konohamaru and Gaara's deaths revealed. But before we get to revealing anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all that, today we're gonna talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Rocket Money. Listen, I subscribe to a lot of different places to watch a lot of different content. When you're a fantasy anime nerd who loves live sports, you subscribe to a lot of things and then forgot you subscribed to them. And so recently I realized through the help of Rocket Money that I was paying $225 a month in subscriptions I was not using. And that's almost $3 grand a year. So you're gonna have to trust me when I say I got a lot of money for today's sponsor, Rocket Money. See, Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. See, because while I'm currently using Rocket Money to cancel unwanted subscriptions, as Rocket Money safely and securely identifies recurring charges and cancels unwanted subscriptions for you, making it so easy that you can cancel those subscriptions within the app with just a couple of taps, no need to make a customer service call. I also use Rocket Money to lower my bills and set budgets. See, I run 4 YouTube channels, and those respective YouTube channels need their own budgets. Rocket Money allows me to analyze my spending habits on those channels and create a custom budget that fits the lifestyle of those individual channels. And thus I can monitor my spending by category and get notifications when I've exceeded my limits. So what are you waiting for? Rocket Money helps its average customer save up to $740 a year when they use all of the features available. And they've canceled up to $500 million in unwanted subscriptions. So to save more and spend less, join the 5 million people who are using Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/NCHammer or click the link in my description to get started for free. You can also unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/NCHammer to get started today for free. So, Chapter 16 of Two Blue Vortex is right around the corner. And like with every time a new chapter of TBV is about to drop, the official Boruto team has dropped some panels to drum up some hype. And in the first and currently only panel that we've gotten from the Boruto team, we see that the two New Age Sand siblings, who are not Shinki, whose names are Arya and Yodo, the girl's Arya, the guy's Yodo, thanking Konohamaru and Konohamaru alone, though we will talk about that in a moment, for coming to the Land of Wind to help out with the whole Gaara Shinki situation. Now, in response to being thanked for pulling up, Konohamaru says, "Nice to meet you. Let's head there right away." And the rather obvious subcontext here is where Gaara is entombed by Shinki's sealing jutsu. And thus it's rather obvious that Yodo and Arya would be involved in this because they're the only people who know exactly where Gaara is. Because they were some of the last people to see Gaara before he was entombed in the Fuin jutsu that Shinki used to save him from Matsuri. And thus it's safe to assume that in Chapter 16, Konohamaru is going to be led to Gaara's Iron Sand cocoon. But is Konohamaru alone? And that's an important question to answer here. See, because the idea of Konohamaru being sent to the Village of the Sand by himself doesn't make all that much sense. Let's set the scene for what we're talking about here. Gaara, the literal Kazekage, Shinki, Arya, and Yodo were confronted by Matsuri, who's presumably one of the weaker Shinju, and a group of claw grimes. That group was so incredibly overpowered by just one Shinju, mind you, that Gaara was critically injured and was resigned to put his life on the line to save Shinki and the other two New Age Sand siblings. Now, out don't know if you guys have been keeping up with Boruto like I've been keeping up with Boruto, but Konohamaru is not as strong as Gaara. And Shinki, who's roughly as strong as Gaara, is now batting for the wrong team. Which means sending Konohamaru to back up the Hidden Sand Village by himself wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because technically their forces would still be weaker than just Matsuri. And while there's not necessarily any way for Konoha, Konohamaru, or even the Hidden Sand Village to know that Shinki has been turned into Ryu, because as it currently stands, the only people who do know about that would be Boruto and Kashin Koji, who are actively trying to avoid that future, but who also don't know that Ryu has been created in the first place because they haven't talked to Shikamaru about the report that he got from Kankuro. But still, at the very least, the Hidden Sand Village knows that Matsuri is somewhere around here and that she was more powerful than Gaara and Shinki combined. And therefore, the idea that Shikamaru, one of the most intelligent people in the entire universe, would just send Konohamaru, who spent the last 15 or so chapters of Two Blue Vortex getting thrown around like a ragdoll by basically any Shinju he comes across, would be kind of a silly tactical error. How are you going to protect Gaara's little cocoon if you can't stop the Shinju coming for Gaara's little cocoon? Now, one could obviously make the argument that Konohamaru was sent in a scouting capacity because so far as Konoha and the Hidden Sand know, Gaara can't be broken out of this Fuinjutsu, and therefore they wouldn't assume that the Shinju would be able to do it, and therefore maybe the Shinju would leave Gaara alone. Tie this into the fact that everybody who's been turned into a tree hasn't been revisited by the Shinju, and maybe the two ninja villages are just assuming that now that Shinki's been turned into a tree, the Shinju will have no reason to come back. But to me, that feels like a small possibility. Not only from a it wouldn't make sense from an in-universe perspective, but also from the fact that it wouldn't make sense from a writing perspective. Because, well, maybe there is some of you out there that are still huge Konohamaru apologists and love to see you get more screen time. At the end of the day, Konohamaru, Yoda, and Ayara aren't carrying the weight of an entire arc or even an entire chapter on their backs alone, with the readers being happy about it. And therefore, it would make more sense that Konohamaru would be sent with his team to the Hidden Sand Village. His team now subsisting of Sarada, Mitsuki, and maybe even Kawaki. Because it's important to note here, Kawaki, well, in the manga a little bit, but mostly in the anime, has done tons of missions with Team 7. And therefore, the idea of him stepping in for Boruto, kind of like Sai did for Sasuke, would not only make sense from like an in-universe perspective, but would also draw a direct line to the beginning of Shippuden when Sai stepped in for Sasuke. And with a dispatchment force of that level of power, they would stand a pretty good chance against Matsuri. And Shikamaru would have to know that. Now, Kawaki may or may not be there because Shikamaru wants to keep an eye on him, but I think it's relatively safe to assume that Sarada and Mitsuki are in the Hidden Sand Village as well. And that's gonna come in pretty handy. Mostly because the Hidden Sand Village, as it currently stands, now that Konohamaru is there, is in a massive amount of danger. See, I don't think it's coincidence that the person who started the chain of events that led to Gaara ending up in a metal sand cocoon was Matsuri. This means that Matsuri has a presence in the Hidden Sand Village. And therefore, the idea that Konohamaru would be sent to the Hidden Sand Village when Matsuri wants to consume Konohamaru would make a fair amount of sense if we're trying to move this story forward. See, because Matsuri is one of the few Shinju who hasn't interacted at all with the person they're trying to consume. The bug Shinju was able to reach out to Ada when she was using her Senrigan. Hidari has interacted with Sarada. Jura has interacted with Himawari and Boruto, which left really only Matsuri to try and find or interact with the person that she wants to consume, Konohamaru. And they now just so happen to be in the same place. On top of this, the newly formed Ryu, who's more powerful than Code, mind you, is also coming back to the Hidden Sand to try and crack into the metal sand cocoon that his previous body made, so that he can consume Gaara. And therefore, the Hidden Sand, now that Konohamaru is there, has two Shinju on the way to it. And the fighting force of Ayara, Yoda, and Konohamaru is not strong enough to fight against one Shinju, let alone two. And therefore, it seems slightly obvious to me, for the sake of good writing and fairness, that Mitsuki and Sarada would also be there, as they've been proven to be somewhat equal to Shinju level in strength. Still, assuming that Team 7, Ayara, and Yodo all fight against these two Shinju, is that even a winning fight? And honestly, the answer is probably no. The only person that we've seen stand an even remote chance against the Shinju is Boruto, who is leaps and bounds stronger than all of these people combined. So if it does come down to blows between Matsuri, Ryu, and this ragtag squad of shinobi, I don't necessarily see it going well for the ragtag team of shinobi. But how bad is not well? Well, to figure that out, I'd like to take a huge step backwards and talk about Shippuden for a second. See, the beginning of Shippuden was not only filled with heartbreak, but also started at a breakneck speed. It felt as though immediately into starting Shippuden that people were dropping like flies, and we were forced to, in very short order, realize just how large of a threat the Akatsuki were. See, within the first 20 to 30 episodes, we're already toe-to-toe against the likes of Sasori. And while what a lot of people remember about Sasori is the huge fight that Sasori Sasori has against Sakura and Granny Chio. The reason that fight happens in the first place is because Deidara and Sasori pull up on the Hidden Sand Village basically as soon as Shippuden starts. And Gaara, the newly appointed Kazekage, is the only person powerful enough to battle against the likes of these two Akatsuki members. And in a very, and I mean very similar situation to what happened in Shippuden, Gaara is forced to essentially sacrifice himself to save the future of the Hidden Sand Village, as Deidara was about to drop a gigantic clay bomb on the Hidden Sand Village that presumably would have wiped it out in entirety. And once again, in the relative beginning of part 2 of Boruto, Gaara was forced into a very similar situation, where in a battle against Matsuri, he was forced to give up his own life in order to protect Shinki, Ayara, and Yodo, the future of the Hidden Sand Village. However, this time, his sacrifice was rejected. You see, because instead of allowing for Gaara to sacrifice himself again for the Hidden Sand Village, his adopted son, Shinki, decided to do that himself, placing Gaara in an iron sand cocoon and allowing himself to be bit by a claw grime. Now, because of the strength of his Fuinjutsu, it meant that nobody outside of Shinki would ever be able to access Gaara, who's now in a somewhat stasis form. And thus a direct line is drawn between Gaara and Shinki, who's just Boruto Gaara. And lines like this have been drawn throughout the entirety of Boruto's run, but especially in part 2. Time and time again, it's been shown to us, even though Ikemoto always talks about how he wants to separate Boruto from Naruto, that a lot of the things happening in Boruto very closely resemble the things that happened in Naruto. But a couple of viewers say, but Gaara dies in Shippuden, and neither Gaara nor Shinki is dead right now. And you're right, Gaara does die in Shippuden, and he's brought back when Granny Chio uses one's own life jutsu on him and brings him back to life in exchange for her life. But let's not talk about that for the moment. Let's keep it in the back of our heads, because there's another very important death that I'd like to talk about that happens in the beginning of Shippuden that ties a very serious line back to Boruto right now. And that is the death of Asuma Sarutobi. See, immediately after it's established that Sasori and Deidara were legitimate threats, the zombie duo goes knocking on a couple of very important doors trying to collect some bounties. And there's no higher bounties, at least in the Land of Fire, than the 12 Pillars. Now, the 12 Pillars were at one point the 12 strongest fighters, not even just ninjas, just fighters, in the entirety of the Land of Fire, not just in Konoha. And these 12 strongest fighters were handpicked to protect the Fire Daimyo, who's essentially like the president of the Land of Fire, who exists above the Hokage because he funds the ninja villages. Now, the only two manga characters of the 12 Guardian Ninja that we know were Asuma and Shiriku. Asuma obviously being Asuma, and Shiriku being a battle monk of sorts. All of the other 12 Guardian Ninjas that we know come from an anime-only arc where they talk about the reason that the 12 Guardian Ninjas split up, and the ensuing battle between the 6 that dissented and the 6 that remained loyal to the Land of Fire. Now, because these 12 Guardian Ninja were so incredibly powerful and spent their entire lives as good people, they had a massive bounty on their head in the underworld, something like 35 million Ryu. And thus the zombie duo, who were basically led by Kakuzu, who was basically led by his love for money, were going around knocking out these 12 Guardian Ninjas, the first of which they killed was Shiriku. And after they killed the monk, that's when they pulled up on Asuma. And because Asuma and the rest of Team 10 didn't know how Hidan's abilities worked, Asuma ended up dead. And thus, in just the first couple episodes of Naruto Shippuden, we lost not only Gaara, but also Asuma. But we only lost one of them forever, and that was the Sarutobi. Now, it seems rather suspicious that we're drawing so many connections between the beginning of Shippuden and this part of Two Blue Vortex, when Gaara and Shinki are both in life and death situations, and the person coming to save them is really the only important Sarutobi in the entire story. And both Gaara and Konohamaru have gigantic Shinju-sized targets on their backs. So what do I think is going to happen? Do I think the exact same thing is going to happen in Boruto that happened in Shippuden? Do I believe that Gaara is going to die and be brought back to life while Konohamaru is going to be killed permanently? No. I actually believe the exact opposite thing is going to happen. See, as it currently stands, even though Konohamaru doesn't play a massive role in Boruto, he's kind of just there to show us that standard ninja, regardless of how powerful they are, really stand no chance against the Shinju. He does play a much bigger role in Two Blue Vortex than Gaara does. See, there's a superstition that exists in the Hidden Sand Village, and that is that all Kazekages are eventually assassinated. It has happened to every Kazekage in the history of the village, with the most well-known and most recent being Gaara's father being assassinated by Orochimaru. And therefore Gaara, as the Kazekage, also bears this curse on his back. The idea that at some point somebody is going to kill him.
But Nick, how would Gaara die?
Well, I actually don't think it's all that complicated. Take a beat for a second and think about all of the people that have Shinju targets on their backs. It's Sarada, Boruto, Ada, Konohamaru, and Gaara. Of those 5 people, rank them by importance. I'm sorry, it's not Boruto, it's Naruto. Well, it's kind of confusing with Jiro right now. He wants to eat a lot of people. He's like, I can't get Naruto, I'll just eat Himawari, and now he hates Boruto. He wants to eat a lot of people, but all the people he wants to eat are very important. And therefore, if we were to rank the characters that Shinju want to consume by importance, it would probably go Naruto, Sarada, Ada, Konohamaru, Gaara. I don't know, some of you are saying,
But Gaara's the Kazekage, the fan favorite character.
you're absolutely right. He is both of those things. However, even though he was involved in the battle against Momoshiki, that's basically all he's done in Boruto. Yes, I get that he was involved in the Oroshiki timeline, but that was also anime canon. Really, when it comes down to it, Gaara as the Kazekage holds less story importance to Boruto than Konohamaru as the Hokage's aide, especially when you consider the fact that Konohamaru is one of the only important characters in Boruto still under the effect of omnipotence, and therefore he acts as a pretty good way marker for the general population's feelings about Boruto, and therefore he holds an okay amount of importance in Two Blue Vortex. So if we're trying to draw direct lines to the beginning of Shippuden, it would make more sense to say that the person who's gonna die is Gaara, and the person who's gonna have a near-death experience would be Konohamaru, the Sarutobi. And unfortunately, when it comes down to it from a narrative perspective, the most useful thing Gaara could do right now would be to die. See, because the way in which Gaara would die is rather obvious. Team 7, Ayara, and Yoda would be unable to stop Matsuri and Ryu combined because they didn't know that Ryu existed, and therefore Matsuri and Ryu would be able to punch through their defensive line. And therefore Ryu would be able to gain access to the number one thing he wants to gain access to, the Iron Sand Cocoon. And as Ryu is simply an extension of Shinki, he would be able to break this Fuinjutsu. At this point, assuming the defenders in the situation aren't able to stop him, Ryu would be freed to consume Gaara, which would not only allow us as readers to understand what that consumption process looks like, but would also allow us to understand what happens to a Shinju after they consume the person they want to. See, because in anime and manga, if a worst case scenario is introduced as a concept, we will at least get to the beginning of that concept. Unless, you know, we're talking about JJK, but we won't get into that right now. In the worst case scenario, as it surrounds the Shinju, is the consumption of the targets that they're aiming for. And therefore, in order to understand just how dangerous it is that Sarada, Naruto, Ada, and so many others have targets on their back from the Shinju in the form of a consumption threat, we have to see exactly what happens should somebody be consumed. And I think the better target from a narrative perspective for that example being set is Gaara, and not Konohamaru. This would not only be an incredible watershed moment for Boruto as a manga, as people would be like, oh my god, Gaara died, but also this would be a great moment for growth for Ayara, Yodo, and even Shinki. Because if Naruto as an IP has done anything, it's been traumatizing people from the Hidden Sand Village. On top of that, whether you like it or not, Shinki is basically just Boruto's version of Gaara, and it was around this age that Gaara took over as Kazekage of the Hidden Sand. And therefore, if hypothetically Ryu consuming Gaara frees Shinki from his tree, or just through some events Shinki is eventually freed from his tree, this would open up the possibility of Shinki becoming the next Kazekage, the 6th Kazekage. And considering the fact that Shinki's Iron Sand Jutsu ties its roots directly back to the 3rd Kazekage, him becoming the Kazekage has always made sense. I'm not saying that there isn't the possibility that Konohamaru could also be consumed, but unfortunately, narratively, that doesn't accomplish like a huge amount. Yes, Mitsuki and Sarada would see their teacher die, but his death wouldn't mean a crazy amount. Asuma's death held a massive amount of import for Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji's character growth. And I just don't think the same amount of character growth would be imparted on Team 7 if Konohamaru died. But it's very clear from the direction the Two Blue Vortex is currently taking that we're trying to reintroduce Shinki as an important character in the story. And therefore the character development of, hey, the man I adopted, I tried to save, and then ended up consuming as a Shinju would be pretty fantastic character development. This could even lead to something along the lines of a power-up for Shinki, as maybe after Ryu consumes Gaara and is eventually defeated, Shinki would just be either merged with Gaara, or he would spit out Gaara and Gaara would still be alive. In either scenario, we are still drawing our connections back to Shippuden, because either Gaara dies and is brought back to life, or Gaara takes Asuma's role and just straight up dies. And listen, I love Gaara as much as the next person, but Gaara is the perfect level of important character that no longer plays a massive role in the story, that his death would do numbers. And so to me, his death feels kind of inevitable. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Gaara is going to be able to make it out of the black iron cocoon? Or do you think that's his coffin? Let me know in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, I understand that G Fuel hasn't sponsored today's video, but when I have one of these before I film, my God, I film in double time.